Music fans hate streaming services. They're reluctant to buy physical products. They want cheap ticket prices, and they also think musicians should be paid a fair wage. Make it make sense. Ticketmaster has been a convenient punch bag since the early 90s, and Live Nation seemed to emerge fully formed in 1996 as the equivalent bogeyman in the concert promotion space. When the two companies merged in 2010, it seemed to a lot of people like the two biggest forces of evil in live music were going to take the whole thing over to the dark side. Truth is, it always felt a bit funny, even to those of us not prone to these sorts of scare stories. And when the US Department of Justice and 30 individual states filed a case against them in 2024, well, it seemed like the writing might be on the wall. Well, there's been a verdict and some findings. But as always with these things, the devil is in the detail, and not everything in this case is quite what it seems. So in this video, we're going to get into it, and, well, you might be surprised by some of the realities of what's coming out of this.
This is music, not diving, with Scuba.
So yeah, this court case has been rumbling on for a couple of years at this point. The DOJ has had its own problems in that time, of course, but we'll avoid getting into those. There has been a verdict in the case, but it is subject to appeal. So all of this has to be taken with a healthy dose of skepticism and a pinch of salt. Basically, a court in New York has officially found that the company has been operating in a legal monopoly. Now, that was the major aim of the case in the first place, and so that finding is in itself a really big deal. The feds had actually settled with Live Nation halfway through the trial, but the 30-plus individual states refused to sign on to that settlement. They said it was too weak, and they pushed on to a verdict, and they won. So what are the main findings? Important to note that this was a jury trial, and because of that, the states were, I think, definitely justified in not settling, because the public at large, I think, has really made up its mind on this issue at this point. Whether there could ever be a genuinely fair trial involving this company, I think, is up for debate. But regardless of that, the jury's findings were damning. So what do they find? Well, Live Nation Ticketmaster, Live Nation Entertainment, as the company is called, apparently holds a monopoly over ticketing services at major venues and also dominates the market for large amphitheatres. Well, that's a big surprise. Secondly, they ruled that Live Nation used its control over venues to force artists into using its promotional services. That's known as the flywheel tactic. Third, they found that Live Nation's business practices were effectively bullying. Internal emails were key evidence in this, and phrases like the velvet hammer and robbing the fans blind were used by executives to describe their leverage over venues and fans. And finally, overcharging. The jury specifically found that Ticketmaster overcharged fans by an average of $1.72 per ticket across 20% of its inventory over the course of the last 5 years. Now that sounds small per person, but it adds up to a very substantial sum in damages, and it could rise further, much further, because there's another piece of legislation which applies here, which might triple the amount of damages that would be payable. So, as mentioned, there is considerable devil in the detail here, and what we're going to try and do over the next few minutes is go through the current system in detail and the proposed system, or the system that is implied if this verdict is put into force. We're going to look at the arguments for that system, that proposed system, and the arguments against, the possible unintended consequences of the changes that are applied by this ruling. But just briefly, let's go over some of those implications. First of all, Live Nation Entertainment might get broken up. That's the parent company. It's not mandated by the existing ruling, but it is a definite possibility, and the powers that be clearly want it to happen. Secondly, they will definitely, under any circumstances here, get exposed to a level of competition that they have not faced in the 15 years since the merger. Smaller promoters and ticketing companies will definitely have more room to compete at all levels of a live business. Thirdly, on the artist side, artists will definitely get more control over who they do business with and the structure of their dealings on the live side of the business. That is, good thing for artists, you would think. And finally, the biggest losers, it seems, are going to be the venues. The implications from this ruling are really quite bad for the ecosystem of live venues in America, and by implication across the markets in which Live Nation does business. So most of the world, basically, anywhere with a big concert, I suppose, ecosystem. So we're going to get into the detail of that. But honestly, it looks bad for that side of things, the venue side of things, really bad. So the current system in which Live Nation Entertainment, a vertically integrated company which dominates the live space all the way up, a path to that effective monopoly arrangement coming to an end seems to be emerging. That's what's coming out of this ruling. Certainly, the court found that the current system should not continue. But how bad is it really from a fan perspective? And how much will the changes implied by this ruling really affect the price of a ticket paid by that fan? And spoiler alert, probably not very much, if anything at all. And another question, are there aspects of a Live Nation monopoly that simply wouldn't exist without that scale, like, to pluck an example out of the air, parking revenue at venues? And how important might those aspects be for the health of the live music system overall? Another spoiler, well, actually, some of them are really quite important, and that parking thing is something we're going to come back to. So let's get a bit deeper into the detail of all this, shall we? If you're enjoying this video, you might be interested in supporting us at Music Not Diving. We have a brand new merch store. You may have noticed this brilliant new hoodie that I'm wearing. We have those over there. We have teas as well. We have water bottles. We also have a Patreon where I post bonus content every week, and we have a great community of people there which you might be interested in joining. If you don't want to do any of that, completely understand. You can just like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Thanks for your time. What does the current live ecosystem look like? And important to note that we're talking about the United States primarily here, and in particular, the larger venues in the United States. So from theaters upwards, it does apply to club venues and below as well, but mostly talking about the bigger venues. This is a landscape that's developed since the merger of Live Nation and Ticketmaster in 2010. And important to note that this has been a development. It did not appear fully formed after the merger. Vertical integration is the key part of it. It's the key part of the strategy that's been pursued. At the most extreme end of the scale, Live Nation Entertainment, the conglomerate, manages the artist, promotes the tour, owns the venue, and sells the tickets. That's, the definition of vertical integration. There are exclusive long-term contracts for ticketing. So Ticketmaster locks venues into 5 to 14-year exclusive deals, preventing competitors like SeatGeek or AXS from entering the building. So all the tickets are sold by Ticketmaster under the terms of those deals. Now, there's a kickback system for the venues, and this is absolutely key. So let's stick a pin in this. Service fees, which in the most extreme cases constituted 30 to 50% of a ticket price, well, commonly half of those fees are kicked back to venues to fund their operations. So basically, what looked like price gouging by Ticketmaster actually was paying for the costs borne by the venue, which of course, without that, the concert couldn't take place. Another key aspect was the reputational shield that Ticketmaster essentially acted as for the rest of the industry. Now, this was specifically discussed in the court case. It's not some hypothetical thing. By design, the company accepted the role of the quote-unquote public villain. This allows artists and venues to keep their face value prices looking lower and fairer, in quotation marks, while they actually do pretty well from the overall fee structure behind that Ticketmaster logo. And like I said, important to note, this shield aspect was explicitly acknowledged in the court case. And finally, the velvet hammer thing, again, in quotation marks, the velvet hammer. And arguably, this is actually the worst one for artists. Artists were often softly, another quote, pressured to use Live Nation as their promoter if they wanted access to the best tour dates at the best venues and the best all-round stuff. This is a straightforward abuse of power in a monopoly situation, essentially. So what is the proposed system, or the system which is implied by the details of this ruling? Well, firstly, there was a proposed cap of 15% on service fees, a potential legal limit set on service fees. And 15% is essentially the low end of the scale of what is charged currently, but actually, as we will see, is substantially below the current low end because it also eliminates certain extra charges. Secondly, multi-vendor ticketing would be mandated. So venues would be banned from signing those exclusive contracts with a given ticketing agency, i.e. Ticketmaster, allowing 2 or 3 different ticketing companies to sell seats for each show. Theoretically, and massively emphasizing that word, this would drive down fees through competition. That might drive down fees through competition. Thirdly, Third aspect, promotion unbundling. Live Nation would be legally forbidden from tying venue access to their own promotional services, allowing independent promoters to book shows at those major venues. And finally, the structural divestiture issue. So we said that the breakup of Live Nation Ticketmaster, Live Nation Entertainment, hasn't been mandated by this, but the 30 plus states that won the verdict are pushing for the full split of Live Nation and Ticketmaster into two separate independent companies. Okay, and I'm, doing my best here to wade through the detail in a way that makes sense, but this is probably a good time to look at the breakdown of a ticket as it's priced currently and how it might be priced under these proposals. So let's say a ticket is priced at $125. That's a decent price for maybe an arena show or a large theatre show. Now, these numbers aren't always going to be exactly the same, but it'll give you a rough idea of the breakdown. So over $125, $90 is the face value. That goes to the artist, typically. Most of that, 90+% of that goes to the artist. $22 is a service fee. That's a percentage. So as the face value goes up, that number goes up. You have $8 as a facility charge. That goes to the venue directly, and that is a flat rate. That doesn't change dependent on the face value of the ticket. $5 is order processing, which is to say ticketing, and that is paid directly to Ticketmaster. And then on top of all that, there is local tax to be paid. So $125, $90 for the artist, $35 for everyone else. Under the new system, the price of that ticket would theoretically be reduced to $90 face value plus 15% fees, so $13.50 for fees plus tax on all of it. Now that sounds great, of course, but as we will see, that $13.50 has got to be split a ton of different ways. So now let's look at the arguments for this change in brief. First of all, consumer savings. Removing the, quote, monopoly tax, estimated by the jury at $1.75 per ticket, but actually likely that's going to be higher in practice, that could theoretically save fans hundreds of millions of dollars annually at a kind of headline level. Secondly, market innovation. Competition would force ticketing companies to improve their technology, fix sport problems, lower processing costs to win over venues. Now, this is, I would say, highly speculative, but it could happen. It's possible. Thirdly, artist empowerment. And we love a bit of artist empowerment on Music Not Diving. Without a single, quote, gatekeeper, love a gatekeeper on the show too, artists would have leverage to negotiate better deals, more leverage to negotiate better deals, keep more of their merch revenue, and lower their own touring overheads. Again, theoretically. I mean, that seems like a slightly far-fetched one, but I mean, again, it could happen. And finally, transparency. Having fully transparent all-in pricing and capped fees would remove the sticker shock, in quotation marks, and reveal the true cost of an event at all points of the purchase process. But as we will see, that swings in both directions. Now, what are the arguments against what is implied by the ruling? Well, first of all, venue bankruptcies. And as I said, the venues are really staring down the barrel here for various different reasons. Venue bankruptcies is a major risk. Many independent venues survive only because of the kickback money from high Ticketmaster fees. If those fees are capped at 15%, many small to mid-sized stages will lose their primary source of funding and go under. Secondly, price shifting. If fees go down, the total price might not. Promoters and artists will likely raise the face value of a ticket to reclaim the lost fee revenue, meaning the fan pays the same amount, but the label on the receipt just looks a bit different. Thirdly, loss of convenience. A multi-vendor system might lead to a fragmented experience where fans have to check 4 different websites to find the best seat for a single show, potentially making the buying process more frustrating rather than less. And people get pretty frustrated with Ticketmaster as it is, don't they? And finally, the reduced touring safety net. Live Nation currently uses its profits, well, some of its profits anyway, to subsidize smaller tours that might otherwise lose money. A breakup could lead to fewer risky or developing artists getting the chance to tour nationally. I mean, again, that one I would say is tenuous. Maybe that could happen. Certainly in the interim, in the transitional period, that could be majorly problematic. But I suppose people arguing in favor of this change would look to a potential future where there is a more equitable split of these kinds of things. And, maybe not. An important question to ask at this point is, why did the Ticketmaster Live Nation merger happen? Well, basically, it's because margins in the live space are structurally very low. It's really very hard to make any money in this space. The margin in ticketing is substantially higher, however, than in promoting concerts, but you need scale in both to really make it work. So, what are the overall profit margins for Live Nation Entertainment, the parent company? Well, the headline margin is 25%. That seems pretty great. But when you look at their concert promotion business, it's only just over 3%. The ticketing margin, as mentioned, is much better. It's 37%. And you can see how that picks up the slack. And then they've got a sponsorship and ads side of the business too, which is smaller, but it's a very nice 64% margin to get topped up to that overall, like I said, 25% margin level across the whole business. So that 3% or just over 3% for the concert promotion business, that margin is kind of the elephant in the room here. And when we're talking about venues, well, about 300 venues worldwide are directly owned or operated by Live Nation, but they effectively control around 80% of the market through their exclusivity deals and all that kind of stuff. But of course, those deals would be seriously under threat from this ruling. And in part, that's why this potential new system poses serious questions for the ecosystem of live venues in particular around the world. So let's look at this venue thing in more detail, because this is really where it gets murky and where these unintended consequences lie that music fans, generally speaking, have zero knowledge of and, don't take into account at all when they're talking about Ticketmaster, Live Nation, these kind of evil companies. So why did Live Nation want these venues in the first place? Well, as we've just seen, being just a promoter is a very low margin, very risky business. If a tour doesn't sell, well, then you lose in a pretty serious kind of a way. But if you own the venue or control the venue in an exclusive deal, well, then you have the chance to win regardless of what the ticket sales are. You reduce your risk essentially. So how do they do this? Well, ancillary revenue, first of all. Live Nation makes far more money from beer, parking, and convenience fees than they do from the actual ticket profit. Secondly, you have the ticketing lock-in aspect. If you own the venue, then you can force them to use Ticketmaster, those exclusive ticketing deals that we talked about. And once the venue uses Ticketmaster, they can get the data on the fans. Once they have the data, they can sell more sponsorships and ticket margins are relatively high. Thirdly, you have the moat aspect. So if you own or effectively control the only 20,000 seat arena in a city, well, you can then ensure that any artist who is able to play those arenas must work with you. They can't route a major tour without paying in your buildings, basically. How was Live Nation able to build up this network, which was very modest in 2010, but by this year is seen to be a monopoly by a federal court? Well, it's a combination of aggressive strategy and really bad and worsening conditions for venues. The velvet hammer aspect, we mentioned that before, that was a key term in the current trial. The DOJ and state's attorneys argued that if a venue didn't sell or sign an exclusive deal, Live Nation would route their major tours to a competing venue nearby. So if you're a venue owner and you see your calendar for the next summer go empty because Live Nation is steering artists away from you, well, then you have no choice but to sell out or go bankrupt. On the other side of a ledger, you have the financial squeeze that everyone is facing who runs a business, particularly bricks and mortar businesses with direct exposure to these kinds of fixed costs. What costs are they? Well, mortgages, insurance, sound system upgrades, maintenance, all those kinds of things which affect a live venue. Many independent owners were asset rich, basically, but cash poor. Live Nation arrived with a wheelbarrow full of money and a promise to take the administrative headache of inflation, rising costs, and all the rest of it. We'll take that away. And for many venues, that is just a brilliant piece of news to get. That's a great email to receive. If you're under a lot of pressure, it absolutely is. Get out of a high stress, low reward business and, maybe keep running the venue yourself, but without the onerous conditions being placed upon you by the wider economy. And, having that support from a huge company just makes everything so much easier. I completely understand that. It makes complete sense. Is scale the only way to survive in this business then? Well, in the current economy, yes, it absolutely is. The National Independent Venue Association published a study in 2025 that 64% of independent stages were unprofitable. They were being crushed by what was identified in that report as the big three factors, and those were inflation, rising labor costs, and the fact that fans are spending their entire entertainment budget on one or two mega events like festivals, like Coachella or Taylor Swift Eras Tour, rather than going to 10 $30 club shows over the course of a summer. We've talked about that before a ton on the podcast. It's a real thing. It's absolutely destroyed a large chunk of what was, in my opinion, the best part of the industry, certainly the best part of the live industry anyway. Live Nation has $25 billion in annual revenue. They can afford to lose money on a concert because they'll make it back on the total spend of each person. So the aforementioned parking, bar spend, VIP upgrades, all of that stuff. An independent venue just doesn't have that same sort of flexibility, that same sort of luxury. They need to make a profit on the ticket price itself, and they absolutely cannot afford to have the portion of the door price which is reserved to them stripped out. It doesn't work. Essentially, Live Nation is providing a safety net and liquidity in what is an extraordinarily risky sector, the most risky sector of the music industry. And this is not a defense of Live Nation. It's just the way the market has developed, basically. There is potentially a pathway to something better at the end of it, but there will unquestionably be serious turbulence in the first 3 to 5 years of shaking this whole thing out. So just a bit more on the economics of live venues. Well, venues basically lose money on the face value of a ticket, whether it's $10 or $100. They are dependent on the service fees to make ends meet. And, the cost of running a venue are extremely high. So staffing, for example, you might have 30 security staff at a 1,000 capacity venue. Ticket takers, ushers, stagehands, box office staff, janitorial crews, plus the overheads. So power, police detailing sometimes for traffic, other disruption you might be on the hook for. Then you've got business rates, insurance. Costs for running a venue like this are just extremely high. And in the old system, the venue survived by taking up to 50% of those fees. And those fees in the most extreme cases were 30 to 50% of the total ticket price. In the new system, if the fee is capped at 15% of that ticket price, well, you can see the math just doesn't math. If the venue's cost to run a show is $20 a fan, but they're only allowed to collect 10 in fees, well, then the venue needs to find other sources of revenue. Clearly, to survive, they're going to have to do one of a number of things. First of all, they could raise the rent charged to the performer. They could tell the artist, we're not making enough on fees anymore, so we're going to have to hike the price for you. You've got to pay a higher price to rent the venue. And you know who that's going to get passed on to? That's going to get passed on very directly to a higher face value ticket price. Another lever they can pull is the price of ancillaries. So the cost of drinks is going to go up. The cost of hot dogs is going to go up. The cost of parking is going to go up if the venue controls their own car park anyway. And so basically by fixing, quote unquote, the fee structure, what the ruling does is take away the hidden subsidy to the venue, which makes the whole thing work. And the venue is going to be forced to be much more aggressive with the consumer on everything else past the ticket price. So parking, beer, cut to the merch stand, also the rent to the artist, these all add to the cost of a fan attending a show. And, some of those, like the rent, will just go back onto the cost of the ticket anyway. So none of this really sounds that great, really, in terms of what it'll actually mean for fans. Let's just talk about parking though, shall we? Because I've been kind of hinting at it throughout this. As I mentioned up the front, parking is something which is basically enabled by having an organization as large as Live Nation running the thing. Independent venues typically do not have their own car park. Smaller venues certainly don't, pretty much ever. It's only when you get to scale that you actually have control over that element, some kind of infrastructure element of the ancillary revenue stream. It's often assumed that venues run on alcohol sales, and to an extent, that's true. It's still the single biggest thing, but the trend in alcohol consumption is going down. And actually, margins in booze sales are lower than in parking. So the profit margin on alcohol in a venue is high, over 50%, easily. But in parking, it's over 90%. Because once the land is paid for, well, then you're just paying a few attendants, and most of that stuff is done by cameras anyway. So really, it's just a license to print money. It's incredibly profitable. In the 25-26 fiscal year, Live Nation reported that ancillary revenue, which is basically anything that isn't a ticket, is growing faster than the ticket sales themselves. And while the bar might make more total dollars per fan, a $50 parking spot is almost pure profit. There's no spoilage, there is no over-serving liability, there's no inventory to buy, there's no thieving bar staff, and there's no licensing to worry about. It's just an incredible revenue stream. And to a large extent, this is what is enabling the business to keep going, particularly at those large venues, but not just the biggest ones. So an example, the Greek Theatre in LA, which is a 6,000 capacity venue, so a big theatre, but nothing like a, an arena or a stadium. 30% of their parking is now sold via dynamic pricing during the ticket process. So if the show is in high demand, they can hike the parking price from $40 to $80 immediately. Now, that might seem like gouging, but like I said, this is a low margin business, and these are the things which are enabling it to continue. So the court ruling might cap the ticketing fees, but it does not cap parking or bar prices. So if the court takes $15 away from Live Nation in service fees, well, they will absolutely charge more for parking, and they're going to charge a ton more at the bar too. And because with some venues, Live Nation owns the whole thing, they are able to do this. Independent venues will not be able to be anywhere near as flexible, and they will come under more pressure as a result. The bottom line is that without the $50 parking spot and the $15 beer, the modern concert venue is an impossible business model. This recent verdict might change who fans directly pay, but unless the fundamental costs of touring go down, then the total price of a night out, when you take everything into account, is going to stay exactly where it is. It's going to be revenue neutral, or it's going to go up, or will continue to go up with inflation, with the cost of everything else. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that ticket prices are not going down. And if they go down a little bit, then the price of everything else that surrounds going out to a concert will at the very least go up to cover that cost. And actually, the truth is, the average cost of a ticket is too low. Acts can't make money from touring. They can't make money from anything to do with music, really, but touring was supposed to be the bit where you could still make a little bit. No one wants to buy music. No one wants to participate in that side of it. But will fans be okay with paying the same or more for tickets if they know that more of the money is going to the artist? Maybe. Maybe it's possible, but frankly, maybe not. Even if the best case scenario plays out for this ruling, for these changes, well, Live Nation Entertainment, might get broken up. The conglomerate might make less money overall, but it's likely going to do absolutely nothing for the ability of musicians to make a living from their art. And really, that's a big part of what is supposed to be getting fixed here. People want tickets to be affordable for fans, yeah, but they also say they want musicians to be able to earn a good living. And this doesn't fix that because the economics of it still don't work. The math still doesn't math. If fans want musicians to make a living from their music, then I'm afraid they have to pay more money. They just don't pay enough right now. They really don't. So what's going to happen? Well, likely musicians are going to continue to be extremely poor unless fans get their collective hands out of their pockets and start coughing up in a more meaningful way for what they think they consider to be an important art form, but which they do not treat like one at all. So, in sum, Ticketmaster, Live Nation, monopoly, bad. But the system which is built up over time is fragile, and it's probably made venues and made the whole thing more fragile. And there is a pathway, I think, to, something better. But this is not going to reduce ticket prices, and it's going to put a lot of businesses at serious risk, a lot of venues that people love at serious risk in a transitional period, which may or may not lead to something which is good. Well done for getting through to the end of this. I hope you found it enjoyable, maybe insightful, maybe informative. I don't know. I'm not going into bat for Live Nation. It maybe sometimes sounds like I was in this, and definitely not Ticketmaster. It's just important to figure out what the unintended consequences of these kinds of things are. Because it's very easy to say, oh yeah, these things are evil. These companies are evil. But the truth is, it's always a lot more complicated. So, if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment. If you've got any, comments to make, which you probably do, then do so below. And I will see you. In fact, just before I go, And on the the topic of last time's episode, the Rolexification of music one, wristwatch check. I'm wearing a Prador vintage chronograph. It's very nice, actually. Anyway, this has been Music Not Diving. I'm Scuba. Subscribe to the channel, and then you'll get the next one straight in your inbox. Nice one. Thanks for watching.
Music Not Diving with Scuba.